Hey nerds, what's up? Today I thought it would be fun to talk about my top 10 favorite sci-fi novels. Now, if you're new here, I am mostly and primarily a fantasy reader, but I do like to dabble into sci-fi, and I'm hoping to dust off my sci-fi boots more in the coming years and really dive into it more. So that being said, if you are a die-hard sci-fi fan, this list is going to feel very basic. This is a basic list. I've read a lot of the most famous things, but if you're newer to sci-fi and haven't dipped in as much and you're more a fantasy reader like me, this list may be helpful to you. I just wanted to warn you guys because it's not like this list is going to reinvent the wheel a ton, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And as always, my top 10 list is really a top 10 pile. I get decision fatigue on naming something number 1 or number 2, so they're all equal, we're just in a pile. That said, book number 1 in our top 10 sci-fi pile is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu and translated by Ken Liu. Now, I love this entire trilogy. I think it's incredible, and I probably, it's an argument. Did I like the third, Death's End, more than Three-Body? Maybe. They're pretty close. Each book was just so quality. But this book just quite simply blew my mind. This trilogy I think I said to a friend when I finished reading it that it was a trilogy that impressed upon me the scale of the universe more than anything I had ever read before. It made me think differently about the universe and our place in it than anything else. And I just love when something can expand my mind like that and really make me think deeply about new things that I normally don't think about. So the Three-Body Problem, or the series, the Remembrance of Earth's Past series, takes place partly, the first book, within China's Cultural Revolution, and it is about contacting other entities, essentially. I think the less you know going in, the better. But a big part of the first novel talks about the scientific principle, the three-body problem. And I will say this, the characters in this series are not fully developed. You have to think of the characters more as ideas of people, because that's what they are. But if you can do that, I just think this expands your mind, has such interesting things to say, and captured me. I read this book in 2 days, which I think is rare. I think some people get bored in the middle. I literally could not put it down, and I felt that way about the whole series. So yeah, highly recommend. Next up, let's introduce a legend, which is of course Octavia Butler, and that's with Parable of the Sower. This was actually the first Butler I ever read and immediately captured. This is a book about basically the apocalypse. It's not actually, but it is a novel about how in the early 2020s, various disasters lead to basically a societal breakdown. And it is gripping. It is horrifying. And it is also one of my favorite things that I talk about a lot on this channel, weirdly prophetic. It's quite funny because after I finished reading this and loved it, I recommended it to my friend, and she listened to it through her library app on audio. And she was like, wow, I can't believe Octavia Butler wrote this in 2015. It's so prescient to what happened in 2020. And I was like, girl, I think that's just when your audiobook was produced, because this book was written in the early 90s. And it's just wild, some of the stuff that she comes up with. And I always think of Terry Pratchett, actually, when I say that. It's just somebody who kind of sees the truths of society, and so it doesn't matter when they're writing, it's always going to be relevant. But this impressed me so much. I've now read also Kindred, which is great. This is still my favorite, and I plan to read a lot more of Octavia Butler, but absolutely loved this one. Next up is actually a short story collection, which is Exhalation by Ted Chiang. And if you've been on my channel, you know I've talked about this several times because I absolutely love this story collection. It is all sci-fi, and to me, Ted Chiang has 2 short story collections, and this one to me deals a lot more with kind of technology and the fallout of that. It's not a good way to describe it, but I think his other one talks a lot about religion and science. This one is definitely technological advances. That's how I separate them in my head. They're both excellent. This one beats out Stories of Your Life, but just a little bit. But for a short story collection to be 5 stars for me, it's every story and it needs to hit, and every story and exhalation just hit. Again, things I love about sci-fi: mind expanding, lots of super interesting ideas, and even if I don't always agree with them, I think they're presented in such an interesting way. I'm looking at it just real quick. I remember my very favorite one was The Life Cycle of Software Objects. So good, and so is Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom. Both excellent stories, but I've given this to so many people. I think it has wide appeal, in my opinion, mostly just because of the interesting things it thinks through. Just as, if you don't know who Ted Chiang is, one of his stories in the other short story collection I just mentioned was the inspiration for the movie Arrival. So that makes you interested as well. And that short story was very good. And also that's a very good movie. So here's my real basic pick, but we're going with it. And that's The Martian by Andy Weir. I love this book. All of these books, I'm actually looking like, so far, all these books I talked about, I read in like a couple of days. So I guess when it comes to sci-fi, I'm all about the like, can't put down. Similar with this book was so delightful, so funny. I still haven't seen the movie, which is crazy. I really need to see the movie. So I went into this fresh, not knowing, and I was just delighted by how funny it was, how the science involved in it, or how at least you feel like you're really getting real science in it, and loved it. I have not read Weir's Artemis, but I have read Project Hail Mary. I did enjoy Project Hail Mary a lot. I feel like it's unpopular to say, but I preferred The Martian. Project Hail Mary was good. This was great. I gave that 4 stars, this 5 stars. Partly my theory is whichever one of Weir's you read first, you like more, because they are similar in some ways that I think sometimes makes them feel repetitive. I haven't read Artemis because I've heard from very reliable sources that I probably would really hate how he wrote his female characters, so I'm ignoring that one. But The Martian, just fantastic. Like I said, funny, gripping, entertaining, such a good novel. Definitely should pick it up. Next up is another classic, which is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. I read this, a long time ago, but totally was blown away. That's actually my only novel of his I've read so far, which again is something else I really want to correct because I know he has several famous ones and is really a staple in the genre. But Slaughterhouse-Five, which is really a book about the horrors of war. What's so funny to me is this is how little I knew when I went into this book like 10 years ago. They were like, it's about time travel. And I was like, okay, it is, but it's not. Obviously, it was super metaphorical. And again, my favorite kind of sci-fi, I feel like The Three-Body Problem had that parable, so where science fiction is used as a device. Actually, I'm interrupting myself. This is what I love about fantasy too, that people I think outside the genre often don't understand about fantasy and sci-fi, and I think is more heavily in sci-fi, is we are using these fantastical elements to shed light on current things. And obviously Slaughterhouse-Five just does that in such an excellent way. It was such a moving novel. Definitely a classic that's 100% worth the read. Next up, I have a novella here, which is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. Now, Becky Chambers is more of a modern sci-fi author that's writing right now and is really big. And this was actually the first thing I picked up of hers. I picked it up when my husband and I, before we were on the internet and had so many recommendations and a TBR that's so unwieldy, we never just go walk into a bookstore and pick up random stuff anymore. We used to go on bookstore dates where we just go and read the backs of things and pick stuff up we haven't heard of. And that's what I did with this. Like, the back just sounded interesting. I liked the cover, and I loved this. It also just asked some very interesting questions about longevity and human nature, and had a moment that actually stopped my heart. It was so chilling. Just a really interesting exploration of human nature in space. Ironically, this is the only Becky Chambers I've ever liked, and it was the first one I picked up. So she is with like a couple other authors where randomly the first book I picked up of theirs was like 5 out of 5, obsessed with, and then didn't really like a ton of other stuff they wrote. I have tried Psalm for the Wild Built, which I only thought was okay. And I also did a Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which also was just okay for me. I don't love either one. So I kind of haven't read any more of her because I don't know, everything else from her isn't work, but this one is great. So I guess my point being, if you've bounced off of Becky Chambers' other more famous works, because I feel like those other two are more famous, you could still give this a try, because I feel like it's a little different in tone than the other two. Okay, next up is my wild card. This is the one that I think is going to be the most unique on my list, and is a book I will be talking about several times later this year for certain reasons. That is Windhaven, co-written by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle. Now, I've been saving this, so I actually have only talked about this on my Instagram and on a live on Read by Kyle's channel, but never on my own channel, which is because this year I am trying to go through all of George R. R. Martin's work, and we generally think of him more as a fantasy author because of Song of Ice and Fire. But this is a series of novellas that were co-written together and then put into a novel. I read it earlier this year, and it is one of my favorite books I've ever read. Here is a spoiler for top 5 books of the year. I cannot imagine something could possibly unseat this. One of the best books I have ever read. Like, literally in the top, like if people ask me my favorite novel, this would be a contender. So maybe that, is it at the top of this list? I don't know. So Windhaven is about a society of islands where really the only quick or reliable method of travel between the islands are from people who are known as flyers and have these flying contraptions that were created from a space travel wreckage long ago. And so they are no longer replaceable. And it is about the Society of Flyers and kind of the caste system that has risen about that, and just kind of like the political stuff surrounding that. And it is so good. And everyone I've given it to so far has loved it. We are single-handedly on BookTube here trying to revive Windhaven. It just is amazing female character, amazing exploration of politics, again, amazing legitimate real world questions being raised in a fun and entertaining way. Also couldn't put it down. Had to read through the night because I literally needed to know what happened. So this is the one recommendation I feel like could be a little random and sci-fi readers haven't read. So this is the one on the list, you know, to make it a little special. Next up in the pile is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. Now, a long time ago, I read and reread Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow. Both are just great books. I slightly preferred Ender's Game to Ender's Shadow, but both great. And then years and years later, I picked up Speaker for the Dead and was really blown away. Now, the reason I'm choosing Speaker for the Dead is I just think it's a little bit more unique. While I think Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow are fabulous reads and do great things, when I read Speaker for the Dead, I just felt impressed about what a different, like kind of offbeat, you know, Ender's Game has a lot more of the typical sci-fi elements to it. Whereas Speaker, I just felt like explored a much more, not much more, but some different and interesting tracks. So it is a part of the Ender universe, and Ender is in that novel, but it's very different and takes place many years later. Those are the only 3 I've read of the series. What's the total series called? I don't know. Just because I've heard they're the 3 best, but I would take recommendations for the other ones I should eventually get around to. I'm not going to read them all just because I've heard they're not all that great, but yeah, Speaker for the Dead, like I think a lot of people stop after Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow. So if that's you, I just recommend trying Speaker for the Dead. I think it has some interesting things to say. Next up, we'll go for another fun pick, which is Red Shirts by John Scalzi. This is the only John Scalzi I've read, which also like literally on my TBR, I have a couple other of his I really want to get to. I absolutely loved Red Shirts. I read this as a part of me reading all of the 2010s Hugo Awards. I have a video on that where I went through all of them and love this novel. I grew up on Star Trek Next Generation. I watched it all the time with my dad. I was a little Trekkie and loved Galaxy Quest as well. Saw that a million times. It was like partly my family's personality. So this was kind of a slam dunk. I have heard, even if you're not a Star Trek fan, this still is funny and it still works because enough of what you need to know has just gotten through to people by cultural osmosis. But I would love to know if you are someone who was not a Star Trek fan and you read this, if it worked for you. However, if you at any point were a Star Trek fan, either any of them, I mean, I was only Next Gen. I didn't watch, the originals. Just do yourself a favor. It's very fun, very lighthearted read. worth it. My final and 10th pick in this pile that we're making of sci-fi is a controversial pick, only because I feel that it is very divisive. I feel like people either kind of love it or hate it. It's not a slam dunk. And I have talked about this on my channel a few times, so it's probably no surprise. But that is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal E. Motar. Amal L. Motar, sorry, I said that weird. I fell in love with this book. It was one of my top 5 books of the year I read it. I loved the writing style. I loved the letters back and forth. It is the closest thing that I've ever liked, I guess, to like a straight-on romance. It is opposing sides in the Time War, people who are editing time, and they're different, blue and red, they're agents, and it's kind of how their relationship develops through letters. And one of the things I loved about this novel was that time travel is a big part of it, but it is used as like a set dressing for the character interactions. And as someone who does love hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, loves the gamut, I loved how soft this was in that really it's not about time travel, but it is. And I thought it used time travel in such an interesting way as a setting rather than almost a plot point that I liked it. Now, most people's complaints about this book is just the prose. Like, you're either gonna bounce off the prose or you're gonna like it. So I guess that's my warning for this book. Maybe you try a few pages before buying or getting it and seeing how you feel about it. But I highly enjoyed it, so I always recommend it. Okay, so those are top 10 sci-fi pile for you guys, since I don't talk about it as much on the channel. Before we go on, I feel like I need to address a couple that people I feel like are just gonna ask me a lot about. The first just being Dune, since Dune is one of the most famous sci-fi novels of all time. I have read it. It was only okay. I'm leaving that for the end here so I don't get totally canceled by all the sci-fi people. It was fine. It was fine. I didn't feel that excited about it. I do know supposedly I'm supposed to go on and at least read book 2, maybe someday, but I just wasn't, I wasn't feeling Dune. I gotta speak my truth. It was fine. It was not bad in any way. It was fine. I have read some Philip K. Dick. Not some. I've read one. I've read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I talk about that in the video. Loved the ideas in that novel. It lacked a little execution, so it's gonna just miss my top, but I am eagerly going to read more of him. I'm just super curious. I think he has some great ideas, so I'll be reading more of him. Other than that, there's some famous authors I really feel like I need to get to, like Asimov. I haven't read any of his, so that's definitely a priority for me. I feel like I've just been recommended a lot. China Miéville. He's sci-fi, right? He's not fantasy. I've been interested in reading his stuff. Maybe dabbling into N.K. Jemisin's sci-fi stuff because I've only read her fantasy series. So you guys can give me recommendations. I already have a big pile. Like, I want to get to more Octavia Butler. I want to read more, who did I say I was going to read more of in this pile? Oh no, Kurt Vonnegut. That's because he's not in the pile. That's why I couldn't remember. I want to read more John Scalzi. So there's a lot to read. But I'd love to hear, give me like your top sci-fi book. What about that? That'll be easier. Give me your top sci-fi book in the comments and any comments about these ones that I recommended. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.